So what we want to talk about today is how to get the best value when migrating your on-premises SQL Server to the cloud. And the great news is that we have a number of programs in place to help you optimize your costs and to get credit for the investments that you've already made in on-premises SQL Server licenses. We'll take a look at Azure Hybrid Benefit, at reserve capacity in Azure, and as well how to use cost management tools built into Azure to optimize your SQL Server workloads.
All right, everybody talks about AHB. Let's talk more.
Yes, absolutely. So we think that Azure is the most cost-effective place to run SQL Server in the cloud. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is the Azure Hybrid Benefit, which is a way for software assurance customers to get credit for the investments in SQL Server licenses that they've made on premises. And another is reserve capacity.
Yep.
And that's actually if you have a steady, long-running workload and you are able to prepay for it, you can get the absolute best pricing if you reserve for 1 year or 3 year in advance.
Okay.
And the final thing is that we have some really great ways to get dev and test pricing in the cloud. One of those is that we actually offer a developer edition SKU of SQL Server on Azure VMs.
Okay.
And Azure is the only cloud that can do that. And we also have special dev and test pricing for Azure SQL Database. So if you're used to getting that great free developer edition on premises, we actually have equivalent offerings in the cloud that can make it a really cost-effective place to do your dev and test as well as your production environments.
I think I have a live question which is similar to what you kind of said. It's like basically, can I get the same pricing offers for moving my Windows Server to cloud?
Yeah. The great news is that both Windows Server and SQL Server have the software assurance benefit of Azure Hybrid Benefit. And so you can leverage your on-premises license to get the best pricing for both SQL Server and Windows Server in the cloud.
Okay.
And that's exclusive to Azure. Only Azure has Azure Hybrid Benefit. And so when you stack together some of our offers, including the free extended security updates for SQL Server 2008, with Azure Hybrid Benefit, that's actually when you get the absolute best pricing. In fact, by putting those two things together, you can see that Azure is up to 5 times less expensive than competitor clouds like AWS. So really a great way to get maximum credit for your on-premises investments, as well as to make sure that your legacy SQL stays secure and updated in the cloud.
I see.
All right. So kind of double-clicking into how Azure Hybrid Benefit for SQL Server works.
Yes.
It is, as we mentioned, a software assurance benefit for SQL Server, and it reduces the cost. For VMs, it gives you what we consider the base rate. And the base rate is actually equivalent to if you have checked the box to say, yes, I have Azure Hybrid Benefit, I have SQL on-prem with SA.
Okay.
You get a rate that's equivalent to just running a SQL VM. I'm sorry, a Windows VM. You're not paying for that SQL license again in the cloud. And actually, if you were able to check the box to say you have software assurance on SQL and software assurance on Windows and get Azure Hybrid Benefit for both, you pay for essentially just the compute, the same rate that you would pay for running a community version of Linux in the cloud. So it really can add up, leveraging Azure Hybrid Benefit for both Windows Server and SQL Server and stacking those great rates means that you get the best possible cost in the cloud, and as well, you really get to leverage those on-premises investments.
Oh, that sounds great, actually.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a lot of savings for customers.
It's huge savings, yeah. Right off the bat, just by using their SQL Hybrid Benefit, customers can save up to 50% off list.
Okay.
So it's a great way to get to cloud. And another great thing about this specific benefit is that it actually allows you to run the license on premises and in Azure for up to 180 days.
Okay.
And this is meant to enable you to do the migration development work and testing so that you feel good about your migration to cloud. So run it both places for 180 days, and then you can switch over to cloud. Absolutely. Yeah. And so there's actually a legacy benefit called license mobility. And we've gotten some questions about what the difference is between license mobility and Azure Hybrid Benefit.
Oh, yes.
And there's a couple of differences, actually. So license mobility is a failover benefit, and it helps you move your licenses around within your own data center more frequently than the 90 days that's in the license terms. So it's really a great benefit, legacy benefit in the software assurance that can help customers set up their failover environment. And the other great thing is that it lets you move your license to an off-premises data center. If you're at a colo or a hoster, or you want to take advantage of a VM in another cloud, you can use license mobility. However, license mobility doesn't get you to a managed SQL database. The only place that you can use your license on-prem to get to managed SQL in the cloud is in Azure. And that's because it's exclusive to Azure Hybrid Benefit. So a couple of things there: the license mobility to manage database, the ability to run on-prem and in Azure for 180 days, and the fact that you can stack Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server and SQL Server are some great reasons to come to Azure, leverage that Azure Hybrid Benefit, and get those unique benefits only in this cloud. So when we talk about getting the best prices in the cloud, one of the things that I mentioned is that if you have a stable, long-running workload, you can actually get the best pricing for that workload by committing to reserve capacity. And that means that either for a term of 1 year or 3 years, you tell us that you're going to be running that workload in Azure the whole time, and you can get really great discounts by paying that reserve capacity. You can save up to 82% over pay-as-you-go models, and you'll know about your costs in advance. They're locked in, obviously. And of course, you do have the flexibility to modify this if you need to at a later date. And the other great thing that just happened with reserved VM instances and reserved capacity on SQLDB is that we actually enable you to pay on a monthly basis now. At one point in time when we first introduced it, it was sort of a pay upfront model, which was inconvenient for some smaller businesses. Now you can lock in that great pricing up front and still get month-to-month payments.
I see. So I have a question here, live question actually in a way. Reserved instances are great, for like long-running stable workloads.
Yes.
Upcoming Christmas sale, Thanksgiving sale, what's going to happen, right? Now, what about unpredictable, workloads, bursts,
Yeah, so we actually have a great licensing construct. I had a slide there, but I don't. We have a great licensing construct for those burstable workloads as well, and that is serverless, which Assad talked about earlier. And so serverless enables you to scale up on the fly, and it automatically scales back down for you when the workload is reduced. And so you don't have to worry about getting charged for that high workload unless the database is active. And the other great thing about it, serverless, is it's actually a per second billing model. So it's really an amazing way to pay just for what you use. You can spin it up, you can scale it on demand, absolutely as much as you need, and then it automatically scales back down or even pauses if it sees that the database is not active.
Pause means like peace of mind.
Exactly. No, it's a really great way. So two great options. One, if you have this really stable, long-running workload, you can actually get reserve capacity in advance and get the best pricing. Or if you have an unpredictable workload, we have great solutions for that too with serverless.
Fantastic.
All right. So as far as how to know that you're sizing your workload correctly in Azure and getting the best cost when you migrate from on-prem to cloud, we have a couple of tools. One is the Data Migration Assistant that Raj demoed yesterday. So Data Migration Assistant actually has a SKU recommender, and it takes a look at your on-prem workload and its current characteristics and gives you some recommendations in the cloud. If you landed it in SQL VMs, this is an appropriate size VM. If you landed it in SQLDB, this is how much compute you might need, the proper tier for your workload. So it's really helpful in helping you select the right SKU as you move from on-prem to cloud. And the other great thing is that once you get to cloud, Azure has a number of tools that can help you do cost optimization once you move. And they actually work not just across SQL, but across other Azure services. So the Azure Cost Management tool helps you understand how you're utilizing all of your Azure resources, including VMs and databases, and let you make it makes some recommendations to help you optimize your costs in the cloud. Absolutely. So we have not only help up front to select the right SKU when you move to cloud, but actually help on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're using those Azure resources in the most cost-effective way. So a lot of optimization opportunities as you move from on-prem to cloud. Many of our customers find out that they could potentially have been over-provisioned on premises because they didn't have that burstable capability. They had to provision up all the way, for their highest workloads. And so they're actually able to make some changes in how they're provisioned when they move to cloud and optimize their costs better when they move out of those on-premises data centers.
Wow, fantastic. Actually, there was another question which is about reserved capacity. Can we do it on Azure SQL database as well as VMs?
Yes, yeah. So I know the slide that we had talked about reserved instances, just sort of the VM model. But Azure SQL database also has reserved capacity. So you can use it for either one. You can have SQL in your VMs. Reserved instances, you can have reserved capacity on Azure SQL database as well.
Okay, fantastic. Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that actually brings us to the end of our cost optimization section. And so between all these things, the great licensing program from Azure Hybrid Benefit, the free extended security updates for SQL 2008 only in Azure, reserved capacity, whether that's reserved instance VMs or reserved capacity on SQL DB, and of course our cost management tools once you get to Azure. Just a great way to right-size your resources in the cloud and get the best possible total cost of ownership when you move to Azure.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for this great information.